arrived here somewhere around the age of 3. So that would be, say, 1949. My family moved to Germantown from Chester, Pennsylvania. My parents had been previously in St. Louis and Chicago, but they were really from Pittsburgh. It was in Chicago where my mother was Jewish, my father was Methodist, but they were both socialists. They lived in a settlement house, a residential settlement house called Abraham Lincoln Center, and it was run by a Unitarian minister and his wife, Curtis Reese and Mrs. Reese. So that's where they first encountered Unitarianism. My mother was not religious. My father had decided that he really couldn't understand the concept of the Trinity. So they moved to Philadelphia, and my sister, Charlotte, was 7, and I think maybe lobbied to be in some kind of a religious school. So they came to this church even though they were warned away from it by Curtis Reese. He said, avoid the Germantown church. The minister here was Reverend Sullivan, former Catholic priest, who was on the theological wing of the denomination, and Reese was on the humanist wing, and they used to actually meet for debates as a form of entertainment. So I guess that's why Reverend Reese told my parents to avoid, but here they were living in Germantown. So we would take the H bus and the 53 trolley to get here. For many years we didn't have a car. So my parents and the 4 of us take these 2 public transit vehicles to get here for Sunday school. So I grew up in the Sunday school here. Yeah.
I'm curious, was Sunday school then similar to how it is now, or what was it like with religious education?
No, it certainly has evolved. We have Al our whole lives, which is a sexuality for lifelong. We had a religious education director, I think, was uncomfortable with the Virgin Mary and Silent Night.
Who was that?
Margaret Odell. But the church had a rather, if you look at the stained glass windows, you see a lot of Christian iconography in them, which for my mother, being a secular Jew, wasn't always comfortable. The religious education was, I thought, marvelous. 2nd grade, we were reading a book called From Long Ago in Many Lands. I still have a copy of it. Stories from around the world, edited by Sophia Lyons Faz, who was a great figure in religious education history in Unitarianism. So we learned about the birth of Jesus, the birth of Buddha, the birth of Confucius. They were seen as parallel kinds of stories of equal value, and a lot of other life lesson stories. And then we had a year devoted to, there was something about Joseph. We had a whole book about Joseph and his brothers, and then Moses, and then Jesus. But Jesus as one of a group of siblings, he wasn't different in any way from his brothers and sisters, but certainly someone who is considered a teacher of value. We even had, at Christmas, we had a pageant alternating with the Bach Christmas Oratorio. So in the winter holiday season, I don't think there was much mention of Hanukkah or other holidays. So we've expanded in that area through the decades, and certainly environmentalism wasn't something big in the 50s. And in fact, if you look at the book Selma Awakening by Reverend Mark Morrison Reed, he talks about the religious education and the absence of images of people of color in all of the various materials. The lower grades had the series Martin and Judy. They were the religious Dick and Jane, I guess. But it was that traditional family with 2 kids, and basically it was a white a white culture. Maybe, So those are the kinds of changes we've had for the better.
And when did you first start to become aware, as you were growing up in the church and in the community, of race relations, racial differences?
Well, my parents, having been socialists, my father a union organizer, in my home we spoke about these issues. We had like an African American woman labor organizer who would be at our holiday dinners. Her name was Neva Ryan. My father was not only acquainted with James Farmer, civil rights leader, but had actually hired him for a job in the union my dad worked for. My father also knew A. Philip Randolph, another civil rights leader. So the idea of it was very important in our home, the whole concept of racial justice and economic justice. So, and there were members here at the church in our, the Kidd family. Brenda Kidd was a year younger than I. A family named Brucey Tucker was a young woman of color our age. And then there was a Mr. Sinclair we used to, when we finally got a car, that we would give him a ride home on our way home, who was an elderly gentleman who lived in Pulaski Town, which is a kind of a community of color segment of Germantown, which has an interesting history. So between my home and the church, I think it was just extremely important. And so when I was in high school and the 1963 march occurred, and I was at a teen conference in Maryland, LRY, Liberal Religious Youth, we had the opportunity to go to the march in a bus. We got in a bus from our conference site down into the city and to a service at All Souls Unitarian, and then bus to the beginning of the march. So there was I felt that was definitely part of our religious experience and advocacy. Though there were members of the church who didn't let I remember one family in particular, one of the prominent families, wealthier families, that didn't let their youngsters go to the march. They thought it would be too dangerous. But there was A. Philip Randolph was a primary organizer of that march, of the whole concept that he had initiated 22 years earlier. So, and I was looking for James Farmer. It turned out he was in jail that day in the South somewhere. But, yeah, he was warp and woof.
Yeah, and was there a large representation at the march from this congregation, or how?
Well, I wasn't experiencing it as this congregation. I was experiencing it as a teen, the national movement and a conference. Right. And then I have pictures that I took with my Brownie camera of people wearing armbands that said you.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And we were way far back on one side, but we were there.
Uh-huh. And what were race relations within this congregation like, or what are your memories of that over the years?
Well, let's see. I think my experience was just of individuals and families and peers and not feeling a distance but when David Parr came as a minister, and there was a Black Caucus, and he was very strong on advocacy to the extent of, I'm told, if he would arrive at your house for a social event and there were no black members there, he would leave or, say something about it. But my mother was kind of a similar kind of person. She would, when it was time for me to go to junior high here in Germantown, the racial balance in the school had almost changed over 4 years from my older brother to me, because when a few African American families would send their children up here to Germantown from North Philadelphia, then the white parents went into a panic and they just dispersed their children to a lot of other schools. But so when I went to Roosevelt here in Germantown, it was maybe 80% or more African American. And my parents were adamant that we would continue to participate in the public school. And maybe it was even more important that we should do that. Yeah.
And then you went to Girls High, right?
Right, yeah. I was there 2 years at Roosevelt. I wrote about it to the newspaper on the 50th anniversary of Brown v. Board, saying, because I was told by people in my elementary school that I would be robbed at knife point in the locker room when I went to Roosevelt, and I was very sad missing my elementary school. But and when I walked into that auditorium, it was sort of like I had never been in that, with that number of people of color in one room, and feeling different. But then when we went to our homeroom and they announced that they needed to elect a president of the class, I piped up and I said, I was in student council. And they said, okay, well, you can be the president. I mean, this majority black class, they said, oh, sure, you can be the leader. Which they 6 months later, they said, why do we do that? Let's get Joanne Robinson, who... but I mean, then, the mass of black faces evolved into individuals with names, personalities, and then were my friends. One person, Cynthia Morgan, we went through to junior high, high school, university. But she got a doctorate, so I wasn't on her level. And I said, my mother sent me there because I needed role models, good role models. Another classmate became an opera singer, and these are all the black students. Another one became a French teacher. We were separated for 14 years because her mother died when she started Girls High. Her father moved to Georgia and didn't see her for 14 years. And then the first day I started teaching in Philadelphia at Vaux Junior High. There she was, Joanne, my friend from junior high. And she was teaching French. I was teaching English, and our classrooms were next to each other. So that could be a sign of a deity of some kind, right? Yeah.
And just give me a minute to figure out. So, who were some of the key people in the congregation that sort of inspired you over the years, or seemed to play an important role?
Well, let's see. There were people like the Mertzes, Oscar and Martha Mertz, Quakers. She was just a warm. I almost remember her from my first day, like when I was 3. I think I have an image of her coming into the house on the hill that other building was called, and the Ebenbachs. And then there were Sunday school teachers. I know Jeff would remember Jesse Brown. I think that was 6th grade, the Jesus year. And he was an African American man, very, and Marion Watlington agrees with, back me up on this. He was very, very appealing, he was very handsome, and I guess I had a crush on him. And also, we had an essay. He had us write essays, and then I think, did you win one? I felt like I was a winner somehow. And I remember being on a bus going down to Temple to college, and encountering him on the bus, and just being just thrilled that I was conversing with Mr. Brown, my Sunday school teacher, on a bus. He died very young. And then music. There was music. There was Joe Chapline and Julia Chapline, and Joe was the choir director and organist, and invited me to be in the orchestra when we were doing the Bach Oratorio, when I was just starting to play the bassoon. I didn't even know all the notes. And he had me sit in with this orchestra of high-level amateurs and a few professionals, and it was, just thrilling. And such a contrast to school orchestras where the wind players just sit there while the conductor works with the violins for an hour, inspiring people. Yeah, and then, the Tuckers, Brucey Tucker played cello, and we were at Fittler and Roosevelt, and then she went away to a private boarding school in New Hampshire. And I remember one time post high school, for some reason she was back in town. We went to visit Fittler, our elementary school, and we're talking with our fourth grade teacher, Mrs. Pennington, and a little black girl came out of the cloakroom in the wrong direction, and this teacher turned around and hit the child. And we were just shocked, and it wasn't anything in our memory of our experience. But on the other hand, I don't know. I mean, there was, over the years I've encountered a racism from some of the teachers in the school system that I obviously didn't know about being white. My sixth grade teacher, who I adored, encountered her, later years one day, and she asked, was I still living over there in Germantown? And then she said something about too many colored there. And it's just like, little disappointments and disillusionments. Yeah. In fact, I was so protected in this church in terms of racism that it wasn't until I was out of high school working at a law firm in Center City, and I was in the ladies' lounge, and heard this conversation. They were talking about Lincoln Drive area in Mount Airy, and this woman said, there's just too many colors there. And it was almost like a physical thing, and I was literally staggered out of that room because it just wasn't in my world, at home or in church.
And did you stay involved at USG throughout your young adult years?
Well, I was one of the unusual people, and we in my family were unusual, that we stayed. We didn't go away to college. Yeah. Between our academics, we were desultory in the academic area. When we were very intellectual, but you couldn't see it from our report cards. So, between that and the economics, my parents didn't have a lot of money. So the first three of us went to Temple. My younger brother didn't enroll in college right away, so he was drafted, spent a year in Vietnam, and then had funds from the GI Bill, I guess, to go, so he got to go away after he was in the war. So I was still a little involved in the church when I was in college, but enough so that I remember Dave Park came down to the campus to talk about organizing some kind of chapter there at Temple. Yeah, it didn't. Then he got into trouble, so we didn't pursue it. And then he did my father's memorial service. My father was killed in a car accident it was just the beginning of my junior year of college. So Dave Park did the memorial service.
And he was the minister at the time?
Yeah, right. So, the story was when Dave Park came as a candidate, my mother voted against him because he said he believed in God. And then when he got into trouble and they were kicking him out, she voted with him because everyone was against him. So that's the kind of household I had. Yeah, so, and then I actually have written about it. I have some of my little talks that I was able to do in church over the years. I talked about how, I was Bill Downs I once ran for the board when I was just in college or just out, and Bill Downs, who's now like in his 90s, is he still living? He was the youth candidate, and I was like younger than he was, but I didn't win, and that was hard. And then when I started to be on some committees, and all the people in the committees were my parents' age, so it was like, I talked about the bridge. It was the bridge between the Sunday school building across the creek here and the church, and how coming across was difficult, coming into the adult church. So and between that and the fact that I married someone from the one category that Unitarians would just say generally, I would not marry someone from that group, who was Catholic. In fact, my father arrived for a Sunday service one time, and very sparsely attended, but this Sunday there were cars parked all up along Lincoln Drive before our parking lot, and he said, "Oh, it must be someone preaching against Catholicism." And it was, so anyway, so that was an irony. So although I was married here in the church by a priest, we got permission from Bishop Kroll to have a Catholic ceremony in the church. But then he wasn't going to his church, and then I was still upset about Dave Park being forced out, so we just, weren't participating. Until my older daughter was in her third year, and we lived just around the corner, and I just brought her to this church school for a social life, because there weren't little kids in our building. So then I started getting re-involved. Actually, the church reached out to me because after my second daughter was born, I had a broken foot and a finger that I sustained just before she was born. So anyway, I needed help to get over here, and the RE director reached out to me and got someone to give me transportation, and then I got involved with the nursery school because it was time for Mara to go to nursery school. And then the nursery school needed advocacy in the church, and they asked me to, so then it's been kind of steady involvement since then.
Okay. That's the cooperative nursery school?
Right, yeah. So, and then a few years later I was on the board and president of the board, and like that.
And it sounds like you've played, leadership roles, and what motivates you to want to play those kinds of roles in the church? What is your vision, I guess, of how you'd like to help this congregation evolve, or what you'd like it to be?
Well, the church, has provided, even if we don't always live up to our ideals, to our profession of what we believe, it's there to strive for. So in terms of race, in terms of sexual orientation, in terms of immigration, I especially appreciated the church, as knowing the church was here when I was started getting involved in advocacy for LGBT students in the schools, and knowing that I just would have a backup. I had a grounding. I had our beliefs, our philosophy, and the moral support that in cases where parents would objected to their child calling another child gay, and interfere, and then a parent would come in and say, what do you want? You want them not to call each other fat on the playground? And I said, yeah, that too. Ding. So that was very helpful that way. There were times when I would occasionally drift away again. Sometimes about leadership. Sometimes there was an interim minister hired who had I had moral questions about, and so I would just sort of disappear for a while. So. But I was invited. I had the opportunity when Marguerite Lovett was here to actually start doing sermons. So that was also a positive thing where I could sort of, well, I'm an English teacher, so I like to write, and I'm a Leo, and I like to get attention. And, and I had things I wanted to say. So my first one, the first sermon I did was on public education. And I learned how not to do it because I was just winging it. I had little talking points on 3x5 cards, and I just, wandered. And I said at the beginning, I'm going to explain why I'm such a great advocate for public schools and my child is not going to public school. And then I wound it up without addressing that, and Debbie Ward came up to me and said, you never answered that question. So, but I got to talk about labor unions, women's rights, gambling. The National Enquirer was a focus of one of my sermons. National Enquirer and the Search for Truth. What else? So, I wrote one about the backlash. I used the word backlash before that author used it, the women's movement.
Susan Foley's book.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I wrote one called Why Don't You Just ... Solutions for the Universe, like how we all do that to each other. You listen to someone's problem, I'll just, just get it solved. So it was a lot of fun and challenging, and then, I don't know, somewhere in there, my older daughter, she moved into, she went to divinity school and became a minister. So I sort of, stopped doing that because, it's her career now.
So she's a Unitarian minister?
Yeah, Unitarian minister. When I brought her here at 2, I remember and I wouldn't even go to church when I brought her at the beginning. She'd go in the room with Janet Ehrlich, and I go grade papers. And I'd hear Janet saying, Mara, it's time to sit down, because she was a little younger. Mm-hmm. They couldn't get her. And then I brought her, both of them, up through the Sunday school, because by then my husband definitely was finished with the Catholic Church. Mm-hmm. So even though I actually had signs, I didn't say I would raise them Catholic, I had to say I would not interfere. Oh. That was my legal interpretation. So I said, well, okay, I won't stand at the door while he takes them to Catholic Church and make funny noises. But then he was done, primarily over issues of sexuality, sex and sexuality, and because of the horrible, threats he had been told as, he'd go to hell if he masturbated and all like that, and he was just done with that. Even though his brother, who was gay, stayed with the church through, to the end of his life. Died young at 39. So I brought them, they both came here to the Sunday school, and Mara said, I didn't realize you'd take it so seriously. And then Emily was the opposite. She was like the rebel. She wouldn't believe, they'd give them, these famous people are Unitarians. She said, I don't believe that. And then at school, she said, no one's a Unitarian. And they asked what religion, She said, okay, well, just tell them you're a Protestant. And then it was the Sunday school class from hell that she was in here. And Bob Williford was a teacher. And I taught not really taught. I worked with really little kids through the years, actually, high school, college. And so I went to pick up Emily at her Sunday school class, and Bob said that she and Beth Sprinkle were complaining so much. He either said, stop complaining or leave. So they left. They thought that was a great opportunity. I said, no, don't give them a choice. Like that. Yeah, so Emily's brother-in-law is a Presbyterian minister, and so they're married. Each of these young people has a sibling who's a minister, so they don't go to church. Uh-huh. They figure they're covered. Yeah.
And I'm interested in the history of your public school advocacy.
Mhm.
And, I mean, you mentioned being a teacher and going to public schools, and I'm just wondering if you could tell us how you got involved in that.
Well, sure. I actually, well, as a product of the public schools, I felt I gained an enormous amount of life experience and contact with people and lifelong friendships. Like in fact, one of my friends at Roosevelt, one of my black friends at Roosevelt, Stephanie Garrett, did not go to Girls High. She went to Germantown, and then she went to Howard. And we were in the teen group at the YWCA in Germantown. That was another place where there was social mixing of races. And I just, I remember being with Stephanie, waiting for the H bus, and just standing on the corner there and blah, 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 blah. And, but she went off to other schools. So I almost literally didn't see her for 30, 35 years. And then one day I was visiting at Restoration Church in Mount Airy, and I was looking at their name tags. And I saw the name Stephanie Garrett. And I said, is that possible? Because I had changed my name. And it was she. And then, so I just sat there the whole crying for the entire, like crying from joy, having reunited. So now we're in touch. But anyway, public schools. So I was a product. I loved my high school. I loved the musical gift I was given of the instrument to play in orchestras from elementary through college. I was in the youth orchestra of Philadelphia when I was in college. And so that was my positive view. And then when I didn't have children, before I had children, I was advocating for, I just remember arguing with people. Of course you should send your children. I would resent people who'd send their children to private schools, and I would fuss at them, and I would talk late into the night about it to them. And then here I was with a 5-year-old ready for kindergarten, charge over to my neighborhood public school, John B. Kelly, with all my devotion, and they had a 2.5-hour program. That was all. And the room itself was just bare of anything, just in contrast to the nursery school here, which was a rich treasure trove of all sorts of things. And then my husband he had gone through Catholic schools, including a very large Catholic high school, of which he was not a fan. He never actually went back for any kind of reunions or and he avoided the Catholic college, went to Temple instead. So he wasn't as like a lunatic about public schools as I was. So what had happened was school funding problems. So Constance Clayton, the superintendent, decided to put the resources in what we call DSEG schools, where we had a better racial balance. So that would be Mount Airy. So I could have, what was still going on today, applied to have Mara go to Henry School in Mount Airy instead of Kelly School, our local school. And that seemed, and then someone came and she was actually heavily recruited to go to Penn Charter, which was closer. Closer than Henry School. And then actually, so that was 1983. I started teaching. I had been in the system since 1974, and saw what was available, not available, materials, textbooks, and all that kind of thing. And the union, I wasn't satisfied with the union, so I joined a caucus within the union, and then I joined the Pennsylvania Council of Teachers of English and the National Council of Teachers of English, because I didn't feel the school district itself was providing enough rich curriculum. So really, from when I started teaching, I was in these groups and running against the leadership in the union, and that kind of thing, writing letters to the newspaper, and it went on from there. So some of the people in those groups, I'm still, they're still in cahoots with them. They're still, cronies, and we do it because we live in the city, and we want, the best for all the children in the city. So, and then when the state went to take over in 2001, it was. They wanted actually to hand the administration in 70 schools over to a private company, Edison Schools Incorporated. Yeah, and this all goes back to Tom Ridge and vouchers and this whole voucher movement, and now we've got, we have a situation nationally where corporations like the Waltons and Bill Gates and the Koch brothers and the American Legislative Exchange, it's just it's a tremendous disinvestment in public education. So even though my older daughter went totally through private school, and my younger daughter went through up until she went to public high school, to Central High School, I still have been advocating for, as a teacher in the system, and wanting smaller classes and wanting adequate materials, and so.
And can you tell me, Barbara, about your involvement in the ERC and some of the history of that?
Well, we used to have a different bureaucracy. It was a little less formal. I think there was a committee, a social justice committee overall, which had all the issues. So I remember, and the people. It was another way to get allies in fights for the city, various issues. So I think I can't remember totally, but I remember going to those meetings. And then, the ending racism, this is again people I like hanging out with, and it's tied up with the public schools because the people on the School Reform Commission, or anyone who's not directly involved with the child in the schools may not see what's there or what's not there. Mm-hmm. So, and when they're focused now on the school to prison pipeline, yes, because our schools in Philadelphia, the schools don't have libraries, the prisons do. So, if you can wait till your child gets into prison, then they can have a library. Graterford has a librarian with a PhD. And they have, actually, there are competitions for the best prison libraries. And there's one in Pennsylvania that was in the top 10, so we can be proud of that. But anyway, so yeah, my mother was a librarian in the free library system of Philadelphia, and she did not want to be a school librarian. Actually, no, she would have liked to be a school librarian because of the hours and the summer, but she didn't want to do the function of the school librarian. Because that's what the school librarian's for. So, I grew up with that too, that's an element that's important in a school.
And here at USG, looking forward, what changes or evolution do you think need to happen, or would you like to see happen?
Well, I'm actually kind of excited right now about all the activism that's going on. Mm-hmm. Certainly, the Ending Racism Committee working on fighting mass incarceration, and we were reading the new Jim Crow 3 years or 4 years before everyone else suddenly discovered the book, and so I think I like the activism that's going on, and the opportunities to discuss, opportunities to act. But I'm sad, but I'm one of, sort of like, I understand why, we're all concerned with our children in our family, and then our children in the church. And so we take care of them in terms of where they go to school. But that, that leaves out the universe of children who are in the schools that we're not sending our children to. So I guess,
Caretaking.
yeah. So I guess, I don't know. I'd like to see us be truly involved and truly in touch with the lives of all the people in our community. And it's hard. It's hard to know it. It's hard to act effectively. So those are challenges. But I feel there's enough, the people are open to hearing about it. So, and our denomination, I was at General Assembly in June, and the three focuses were Black Lives Matter and incarceration of immigrant families and the environment. And, I'm just, our denomination is where we need to be on those things and leading. But at the same time, there was no discussion, particularly of public education, at General Assembly. And so there's room for growth, yeah. But I'm here, and my husband, Bill, he was involved. In fact, we were teaching AYS about your sexuality because he was so appreciative of the healthy view of sexuality that was represented by that curriculum. And he was socially involved, but he never actually joined the church, and I was very intent on not. We don't proselytize, we don't pressure anyone. And in fact, when he said at one point that he felt that when we had children, he would not be comfortable if they weren't baptized. And then when he actually saw our first daughter, I think he looked at her and no evidence of original sin. So he didn't pursue that at all. So I never had the thing of naming them here because he hadn't insisted. But once, when our daughter was about to be ordained as a Unitarian minister, then he became an official member of the church. And now he spends more time here than I do. So.
Is there anything else that you'd like to share or add?
Well, I guess I'm just very appreciative of the church itself, the denomination, where we've been in leading in society for these things, going back to abolitionists and moving forward. And as long as we're humble and we know we don't know everything, and and we all have to sort of assess our own commitments and effectiveness. But I don't know of a place where, I've had people come here, like a flute player in my trio who's gay, and I think we were playing here one Sunday where we're actually doing the half a sermon with a gay woman teacher, and she just had never heard these thoughts or this advocacy from a pulpit in her life. So there's moments of pride. So I'm glad we're here.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I don't remember anything from the early years of Sunday school because I think that was my protesting years.
Yeah. And you did not have a crush on Jesse Brown.
No.
That makes it very memorable, right? When you had a crush
The
on
early
her.
years, was it fifth grade? There was the church across the street because that's my main memory of Sunday
Oh
school.
yeah. Well, how about Bruce Bush putting his comb in the holy water? Do you remember that?
No.
Yeah, he was. He was very rude about that. I think his father was a Quaker. He was head of one of those big schools, Friends schools maybe.
And, you know, we have to just figure out what we're gonna do with Kent here. He's,
Yes, I think we better see if he needs
Give him his.
help.